somebody who definitely can educate me is Dr. David Waring, who is a lecturer in international relations at the University of Sussex. David, very good evening. Are you surprised at this move by Keir Starmer?
Not hugely, because I don't think it's a particularly bold or dramatic shift. I think The Guardian are slightly hyping it, to be perfectly honest. We don't know what's going to be announced yet, but just from reading that article, which only came out a few hours ago, we're not talking about recognition of the kind that was given by Ireland, Spain and Norway a couple of weeks ago, which was recognition straight away, and not contingent on, or not dependent on, a so-called peace process. This is something quite different. This is saying that during some future peace process, and before the end of it, which is effectively saying very close to the end of it, then they would recognise Palestine, a Palestinian state. When it was, by that stage, and we're talking extremely hypothetical here in terms of the peace process, by that stage it would be a fait accompli anyway. So it's a bit of a nothing policy, to be honest. And there's an air of you mentioned the electoral calculus. I think there's an air of sort of desperation there, up to a point, but it's not the sort of bold shift in policy that would win back people who've been thoroughly alienated by the way Labour have behaved over this, which is not just Muslims, by the way.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right on that. But it seems a bit odd to me that if you're really concerned about losing votes from those areas, and then you come up with a policy that is, it kind of goes along with the don't drop the Ming vase idea, doesn't it, I suppose, because it's not very daring. What's the point? Because people will automatically say, well, just recognise them now, like Ireland has, like Spain has, like Norway has. What's the disadvantage of doing that?
You tell me. It's a good question. I agree. I don't see that. I think there's an element of the people in the leadership, they don't really understand the people that they're alienating. They don't understand the people, the voters, whether it's Muslim voters, whether it's just progressive left-wing voters, and their concerns about this. Maybe they think that this will be good enough, and they're going to be disabused of that notion quite quickly. It's not going to do them any good. You made the point I was going to make in your question. In a way, it's a pretty feeble move, and it's not going to shift the dial for them.
Alan in Devon has sent an Alexa message. He says, to be quite frank, I don't understand. Can you explain the relevance of this recognition of Palestine? What does it mean?
Yeah, it depends who's doing the recognising. What the Palestinians have been trying to do, because there was a peace process, so-called, in the 90s, and that kind of fell apart at the end of the 90s, and there's been nothing since then for the Palestinians. And so what the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank have tried to do is go in a different route and get recognition from international bodies like the UN. And that was useful, getting recognition at the UN, because it allowed them to join the International Criminal Court and get under their jurisdiction. And the recent attempt to issue arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor comes from that tactic. Once the Palestinians have got that recognition, then they're under the protection of these organisations. Now, that kind of recognition matters. When it comes to recognition from states, it's more symbolic. And I don't say that to do it down, because the symbolism carries a political message and puts pressure on the Americans, who are key to all of this. If the Americans find that their position on Palestine is being quite loudly and boldly contradicted by key allies in the West, and it makes it harder for them to maintain it. If Britain was to shift in that way and recognise Palestine now, it would be effectively be saying to the Americans, you're getting this badly wrong and you're losing support of key allies and you need to change course. And that's not really what Starmer's doing.
That would be the brave thing to do, though, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would, yeah. But this is not something clearly they're prepared to stick their neck out to do. I don't hesitate to use the word bravery, but the right thing to do. And, if we think about this with reference to just basic human rights and human decency, frankly, given the horrors that are happening in Gaza at the moment, the correct thing to do at this point would at least be to say, we're going to pause arms sales to Israel. until such time as we can be clear that they're not going to be used in serious violation of international law, which is, I'm virtually quoting British law there. You can't supply arms to a country which might be violating international law. And when there's an application for arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity, when there's a serious question of genocide, arms sales should be off the table. And the people that Labour are trying to win over with this policy, what they will know in response to this is that it's all very well you talking about recognising Palestine in 100 years' time, but your policy is still to arm Israel. Even 8 months into what their critics, Starmer's critics on this, see as a genocide. You're not going to win those people back with an empty gesture like this. You need to take that kind of action if you want to win them back, and if you're not prepared to, then you won't win them back, and you'll have to live with the political consequences.
So we talked about recognising Palestine several weeks ago on the show, and I have a feeling that I described it as a giant exercise in virtue signalling. And from what you're saying here, that's exactly what this is, that if it is right that this is what Keir Starmer is wanting to do, it's trying to send a virtuous signal out, but not in any really meaningful way. That seems to be what you're saying.
It depends on the kind of reaction. If he's saying, we'll do it in a peace process, which is, it's like just saying mañana, because there's no peace process and there's no prospect of one. And then the one that we had was heavily skewed against Palestinians. If you're saying there's going to be recognition as part of that, and at the end of that, you're saying nothing. If you're saying we'll recognise Palestine when we get into government on day one, just like the Irish and the Norwegians and the Spanish have done, that would be quite serious. It's symbolic, but it's symbolic in a meaningful way. Symbolism is meaningful in politics. That would be something else. But this, I don't like the term virtue signaling, but it's an empty gesture, and we can agree on that, I think. Yeah.
I mean, does it even go as far as David Cameron has gone?
It seems broadly the same to me. I mean, the language Cameron uses echoes what the Saudis have been saying to him and to others and to the Americans, which is that don't expect anything from us on this in terms of a sort of, a trilateral deal between the Israelis and the Americans until there's irreversible progress towards a Palestinian state, because you can imagine the pressure they're under in terms of what their population thinks about all this. The idea that the Saudis would have a peace deal with Israel when Israel's conducting what people in Saudi Arabia and right around the world see as a genocide is just, it's unthinkable. And that language about irreversible steps, I think Cameron's kind of mirroring what he's hearing from Britain's allies in the Arab world.
David, thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. David Waring, lecturer in international relations at the University of Sussex.